Welcome to Talk Branding to Me, the podcast for women building intentional businesses and brands rooted in strategy, not just aesthetics.
Branding doesn't have to feel overwhelming. It's more than design. It's how strategy and style come together to create an identity, build trust, and stand out.
We're your hosts, Jamie Wright of Embellished Brands
And Jessie Ford of Untethered Design Studio.
We're brand strategists, designers, and friends who turned our coffee chats into honest conversations about branding done right.
And wrong.
If you're feeling stuck or unsure about your brand, you're in the right place.
And now, let's talk branding. Welcome back, everyone, for another episode of Talk Branding to Me. I am Jessie here with Jamie. How are you doing, Jamie?
I'm doing good, Jessie. I'm glad to be back with you. We've got some good stuff to talk about today, I think.
We do. Today, we are talking all about design lessons that we have learned throughout our careers as designers, as brand strategists, as business owners. So much that has kind of evolved over the years and things we've learned early on in design school and through our experiences working with different clients and the highs, lows, ups, downs, everything in between. So let's go ahead and just dive right in. We've got a few topics to kind of cover in this conversation, and I'm excited to get started. So why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Well, the first thing that we have both learned is that designers are problem solvers. Really, this occurs I think, in a multifaceted fashion in working with clients where we have to figure out how to interpret what the client wants and or needs. Sometimes those are two different things. But also we have to figure out then how to deliver on that vision.
Yes.
Once we understand what they want or need, then we've got to figure out how to deliver that. And I will say that this isn't really something that I learned specifically in school when studying design. It's something that I actually learned in the real world, in working with dozens and dozens and dozens of clients over the years, listening to what they say, and also I was going to say reading between the lines, but I guess maybe listening in between the words. But really, like, what are they also not saying? And even too, now with the rise of doing video calls and video meetings, that wasn't a thing when I first started my business. So I was actually on the phone doing phone calls a lot. But now even with doing these virtual meetings where we can see each other, also looking at body language, facial expressions. So there's a lot of communication, I think, that comes through an engagement with a client that helps us understand what the problem is. And then we learn feedback to help the client figure out what the best solution for them is. And so through that, whether it's a logo design or whether it's maybe just a strategy, or maybe even before that, in my experience, sometimes they're not sure what their problem is. They just maybe have a bunch of symptoms that they're like, I need someone to help, and it might be this. But then, in my experience, I would then talk it out with them and go, okay, well, actually, I think what the issue is probably X, and therefore the solution might be Y. And that is something I can help you with. So if you like, we could move forward, work together, that kind of thing. But ultimately, I do believe that designers are problem solvers, and that is not an innate view necessarily that people might think of designers as being. They probably have an impression that designers are they're creative, artistic, right? But there really is a lot of logistical planning and interpersonal skills and psychology and all of that goes into it to help achieve the end goal that a client might want, or helping the client figure out what their end goal is and then helping them get there. What are your thoughts on problem solving as a designer?
I love that. Everything that you just said, spot on. Because let's take it a step further. I think as a business owner in general, we are problem solvers, right? At the end of the day, designer, coach, consultant, whatever you are, whatever service you provide or product you deliver, at the end of the day, you are solving a problem for your client or customer. You are providing a solution to their problem or something that they need and they can't create or build or execute on their own, right? So
Absolutely.
that kind of is a great segue into the next, point, in that we're not just designers, right? We are of course, business owners, but who are we to our clients beyond just the role that we serve as a designer in the design capacity? We end up being coaches. We end up being consultants. We end up being strategists. We wear a lot of different hats. So I think clients are sometimes surprised when, they hire me as a designer and they think that's enough and that's just what they're getting. But I just sort of naturally, organically evolve into almost like a business coach for them. And a lot of that just stems from my own years of building a business and all of the years of working with clients, seeing what works and what doesn't, and what is needed and what is not needed, right? Like we deliver services, branding services now to clients in totally different ways than we did, 5, 10 years ago, because that just comes with growth and evolvement. So that being said, I think we're not just designers and that's not, just what someone is hiring us to do. They're really hiring us to end up being a guide for them, a resource, and really even someone who continues to provide support even after we're done working together, right? Like in this realm of, building brand strategies, designs, launching websites, marketing campaigns, things like that. I think we're always providing support. We don't just sort of offboard someone and say, okay, see you later. Thanks. And good luck. And you're on your way. I think we just sort of end up being hopefully a go to expert and sort of leader for them to kind of keep coming back to and keep consulting with. So that's just such a huge lesson that I feel like I've learned and you've seen it too. We might have started off being designers or, whatever, but we end up being so much more to our clients. That in turn adds so much more value to the services that we provide. I think that's one of the biggest lessons that I've learned. So I'm sure you can relate.
I think that is such a great point, not only from just the perspective of us in the design and branding world sharing our experience, but also for our friends who are listening who might be small business owners or who might be looking for somebody to help them with something that might be looked at as artistic or creative, which brands absolutely are those things, but design not just necessarily being only art, it's actually strategic too in terms of what you come up with, why you come up with it, and then, the end results that are the brand assets that are designed. There's a lot of strategy that goes into it. So it's much more than the art form, but also what's behind it and the intention of what you do with those designed pieces. That is important. So
Mhm.
that I think is a good takeaway for people who might be considering, I need to redesign my brand or maybe you need to create an initial brand. So you just develop something from scratch. Consider the fact that your brand isn't solely just art or design itself, but there's a whole
Mm,
strategy that goes into that. And
absolutely.
with things being purposeful in how they're designed. So again, that's where the strategy comes in, where you create this roadmap and then your design or your brand assets become the pieces, I guess, that you use to visually communicate what your design is all about or what your
Mhm.
actually your brand strategy really is all about. And so our job as designers, I think too, is beyond just helping you solve the problem, but in figuring out the solution and the
Mhm.
artistic vision is why are we doing this and how are we doing it and making sure we
Mhm.
get to the finish line and we have these beautiful pieces that are designed. There's a lot more that goes into it. And so just thinking of design as not just being art but being also a strategy to help visually communicate different aspects of your brand, I think is a really
Mhm.
important perspective to have.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The longer that I do this, I find that strategy really drives the design.
Agreed.
Strategy does come before the style, right? The design, the visuals, how everything does, get pretty and stylized in the end
Mhm.
is determined by the strategy and the foundation that is laid up front. Because then otherwise, you can design a pretty logo and a pretty website, but it is not going to function or speak to who it needs to speak to, provide the right call to action, be navigated the right way, or just have its message consumed in the way that it needs to be if there is no intention behind the design, why you said this here, why you placed that there. How someone interprets design really is driven by the strategic direction that is kind of executed up front, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I just, and I wouldn't have said that years ago. I think years ago, I just very much played the role of, okay, I'm the designer and I make the pretty logo and design the pretty website and put together the pretty color palettes. And those are all necessary things and there's value there. And, people are happy with the end products. But it's also the reason why something might pivot or change a few months down the road because the client wasn't super clear on who they were trying to reach, what they were selling, how they wanted to sound. Now I walk my clients through so many more strategic exercises, doing brand audits, filling out questionnaires, things like that, so that the foundation is really laid solid. There's a lot of clarity there. And honestly, for me, it makes the design process flow so much easier. I am able to, hey, take what they said and what we've kind of explored and sort of dug into, and I'm able to create a stronger mood board,
Hmm.
stronger logo concepts. Everything feels more aligned because it's rooted in that strategy that we, figured out early on. So, strategy first and style second,
Yep.
to me.
And for our friends listening, you will hear us talking frequently about how branding is both strategy and style. It is not one or the other. And that's a hill we will probably both agree to die on.
Yeah. Yeah, they're equally important, right? Like, one is not more important than the other, but the importance lies in, like, the order that
Hmm.
they are sort of formed, and one kind of leads the other, and they sort of go hand in hand, and it's about the right balance and the marriage, between the 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now kind of bringing this a little bit full circle, the third point that we want to share as a lesson that we both learned is also that design is subjective. So while design isn't necessarily always about the art, the visual components that come out of the design process are also viewed subjectively.
Mhm,
And I think back to my time taking my design classes, different art classes, graphic design, web design, and we were taught a lot of rules about how things should be done. And for, I think, my maybe initial years in working with clients, it was like, I have to follow these rules. This is what I was taught. But then sometimes a client wouldn't see the vision. I followed these design rules to give you this, and with their feedback or their likes or dislikes was just contrary to what these rules were intended to do.
mhm,
The output, the creation, following certain design rules, so to speak, it wasn't pleasing to the client, and they didn't care about certain rules or whatever I was taught. And so I had to learn that maybe these rules that I learned in school and from different people in the industry, they're a they provided a decent structure and a good foundation from which to kind of get started on building out some creative designs. But design is subjective. Everyone will have an opinion about something. They will love it, they'll hate it, they'll be lukewarm about it. And so, kind of coming back to an earlier point where then we become problem solvers as designers. So,
mhm,
what was it that you didn't like? What didn't resonate with you? But also considering we'll call it, say, brand owners' personal
mhm,
feelings, and also but I know you feel this way, but what would your audience say about this? Well, maybe
mhm.
it doesn't resonate with you. Would it resonate with your audience? So
Yeah.
that's one of the more, I would say, maybe more difficult aspects of working in brand design is that subjectivity and
Mhm,
even our personal opinions about what we're designing. And
mhm.
designers, I think, Jesse, correct me if you don't feel this way, but I would say designers have opinions on how things look.
Oh,
We
yeah.
have opinions on fonts, we have opinions on colors, and I
Mhm,
love a good conversation where we just let our opinions fly about our thoughts and personal feelings on certain things in design. And
mhm.
yet, someone else will love the things that we hate, and someone
Yeah.
else will make a request that bends the rules that we've learned. And so I think through all of this, because I honestly feel design truly is subjective. So sometimes to balance that out, we have to take that objective approach. So I think that's where the
Mhm.
strategy is really helpful to have because that kind of becomes a roadmap that helps you down this path of then creating something that is really on brand and
Mhm.
really captures the essence of the brand so that it not only satisfies the desires of the brand owner, but also of the brand audience, who you were trying to reach and connect with. And so, I think just if I could offer advice, someone who is wanting to go down this path of creating a brand, I think it's really important to hire someone. It's an investment, but it's a good investment of
Yes.
just bringing a professional alongside you that
Mhm.
understands all these nuances and helps you walk through them. Because
Mhm.
to your point, Jesse, you don't want to redo this in 6 months. You don't
Mhm.
want to do it maybe in a year or even 3 months because you put something together and then you threw it out in the world and then realized it doesn't actually work for you. So
Mhm.
just keep that in mind that, there's subjectivity, which we try to manage with strategy, but ultimately those things all work together in order to have some end result that we hopefully love. But what are
Mhm.
your thoughts on subjectivity and design, Jesse?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. You also, as a designer, you do know what looks good and what works best, but sometimes it is hard for the client to get on board, even though you know that what you're doing is taking the design, in the right direction. It's kind of being prepared for feedback that you don't necessarily want to hear. And it's good to be critiqued and to be challenged. And it's not that we're always right, but it's easy to take offense sometimes when you are the professional and you do know that what you're doing is right. It's like me not being a plumber and trying to tell the plumber how to fix the leak under my sink. So it's easy to you have to learn how to sort of like be discerning with the feedback, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, you take and leave certain parts of it because you do want to make sure that you are seeing the client's vision clearly and delivering it, in a way that does make them happy, that they are good with because it is their investment and it's their money. And I'm a big believer and it should at the end of the day basically be what the client wants because it's their deal. It's their design, it's their project, it's their brand. So, it should be aligned with their vision. But taking it back to the earlier point, as a designer, right, you're also that consultant and you're that strategist. And sometimes all you can do is continue to offer guidance and say, well, you make a good point, but here's why I did what I did. And again, it's all about having that intention and that purpose behind why you're designing something a certain way. I've had to explain that a lot over the years. Someone will say, well, why did you do it that way? Or, hey, we left that out. Or should we have this in here? And I'll just kind of kindly professionally explain why I did what I did and what we need to include and what we can leave out. And maybe these colors aren't right. Maybe we should explore something over here. So it's about being prepared for accepting feedback, but also making an educated argument for why you also do what you do. Because you are the
Mhm.
professional and you do know what you're doing at the
Mhm.
end of the day. But I think most importantly, it just comes down to, always remembering the purpose behind the design, who is going to see it? I mean, most importantly, it's about the audience that is consuming the information, right? Good design at the end of the day simply communicates a message clearly and effectively and concisely. So someone should be able to scan something, go through a website, see a flyer, see a post on social media, read through an email, and top to bottom, within a few seconds, be able to know what they're reading, what the point of it is, what message it's trying to communicate, and then be given a call to action to learn more or follow up with more later, right? Or to be able to contact someone. I think it's just about keeping in mind the principles of good design, hierarchy and structure, and good messaging, good design go hand in hand. Remembering the audience that you're serving. And even when you are working on something for a client, bring in their feedback, let them feel connected to it and collaborate on it and let it be what they really want. But be prepared to make a good argument for why it also needs to look the way that it does based on your professional opinion and expertise.
I agree. And I will say I'm thinking of some very specific circumstances I've had over the years with clients where some feedback has come out of left field for me
Yes. Oh,
and
yeah, we deal with this daily.
And
I have a
so
million examples running through my mind right now, like,
yes,
even from today.
yes, we've got stories. We won't probably share
We
them
do.
here,
That could
but
be an
there are
episode
some
for another day, would be, like, some good
exactly.
client stories, anonymous
Yes.
client stories.
But sometimes I just remember being so shocked at why are they asking for this? Do they not understand the process we just went through to
Yeah.
get this thing that they're now giving me this feedback on? Because the feedback seems completely disconnected from the conversations that we had leading up to this result that they're reviewing. So then, I kind of do a fact check with myself of, okay, did I miss something somewhere? Did I fail to communicate effectively? And as you stated, just having that conversation with the client and saying, "Well, this is the why behind whether you may not have realized it or not. This was done intentionally." But ultimately, I think I've learned actually. I will take the feedback and I will try to, figure out where it's coming from, especially if it feels like it came out of left field.
Mhm.
And then we'll have a dialogue about it. But if a client is dead set on wanting it a certain way, and I have already taken the time to explain professionally why I respectfully disagree, and they still say, I hear you, but that's all I need. I won't fight the fight. I've explained the stance, I've explained the process, I've explained whatever it is of how we got there. And if they still insist on making some change that I don't agree with, then that's fine.
Mhm.
It's
Right.
it's their project, it's their choice, and we'll do
Yeah.
that. And they see again, coming back to that subjectivity, I see it one way, they see it a different way. And we
Mhm.
have different perspectives because we each have different roles in this process.
Mhm.
And so I have learned over time. I used to get frustrated by subjectivity because I'm like, can't you see the design process? And can't you see?
Mhm.
It's all subjective. And so I
Right.
just have learned to make space for that, not only within the design process itself, but you brought up the very good point of the feedback portion of that process. And so it is what it is. I've done my best to be a guide, but the client
Mhm.
is the last word. It's their approval
Yep.
that we are looking for. And so if
Yeah.
they want something a certain way, all right then.
Mhm. I will add too, don't be afraid to push back. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be afraid to explain yourself because part of what someone is paying you for is a lot of what someone is paying you for is your professional expertise. So, it's also not just going along all the time with everything that they necessarily want. You are also being paid, to consult with them, to be a professional, to offer your professional advice and opinions, So don't be afraid to kind of, like you said, take your stance and make your point and just, kind of express your thoughts and push back a little bit. And then if you don't get any further, that's okay. And it is what it is, and that's what they want. But I think a lot of that comes with time. I would have been too afraid to push back too hard on people years ago and being a people pleaser and keeping in mind, "Oh, I just want to give them what they want." I'm much more inclined and I mindlessly, without a thought, push back on clients all the time in a very kind, gentle way, of course. Hey, here's why we're kind of doing what we're doing. And here's the thought process behind this. And here's the thing sometimes, a lot of times, if you just express that and just explain it, they will understand. They'll simply go, and I'm sure you've had that experience, Jamie, where they do react positively, like, "Yeah, that is a good point," or, "You're right, I didn't think of it that way." Sometimes it takes 2 seconds just to have a conversation and just explaining your stance and them actually understanding and being okay with it?
Yeah.
And then you're so glad that you did push back a little bit because sometimes they don't mind.
Yeah. And I
Yeah.
would even say too, for our listeners who are business owners thinking about hiring somebody to help them design a brand, please don't take this conversation as it's something negative in terms of us just telling designers you are right, you're the guy, you're no. We absolutely approach designing of brands or just design in general from a collaborative
Mhm.
perspective, so please do not mishear us on that. But at the same time, when you are coming to somebody and you are wanting to hire them, they have a level of expertise, they have a level of experience, they have a style. Your person that you're bringing on board to help you with this project is the subject matter expert, in my opinion. Anytime you are outsourcing something and you are exchanging money, the person I would hope that you're doing that with is a subject matter expert. And so
Mhm.
I think there's a level of trust that you should anticipate having. And if you somehow are working with someone and you are paying somebody that you don't have a level of trust with, I would
Mhm.
encourage you to potentially re-examine that relationship and maybe find someone else that you have a level of trust with where this kind of dialogue and feedback and collaborative design and working process can just be so much more beneficial to you. And
Mhm.
I'd like to think that the majority of my clients and the projects that I worked on in the past, they've all really been very collaborative. But there have been a couple where, there was just something that felt off. And again, I'm running through, okay, do they not understand? Did I miss something? Is it subjective? Like we
Mhm.
see this in totally different ways. How do we find a middle ground and how do we get to a solution that works for the client? I wonder if they just, for some reason, don't trust me. And so the feedback becomes very critical. The feedback feels like a little bit, shall I say, micromanaging. And
Mhm.
and so as someone who I think is the subject matter expert in for what they had hired me to do, it makes the process more challenging. And I also think it's a little bit restrictive of what the end result then can be. And so just sharing all of that as a somewhat unfiltered experience being on the designer side of things for clients in that I just encourage you to find someone that you trust, that you
Mhm.
just really have a rapport with, you hit it off with, because that just adds to the collaborative process. When you are able to have synergy, I love what comes out of synergy because that
Mhm.
is where I think you get some amazing things. But when you
Oh, yeah.
don't have that, it's a very closed off and restricted process. And it's a struggle to get
Mhm.
something that is really valuable and on point, in my
Yeah.
opinion. I think it's a two-way street here. So designers
Mhm.
certainly have a process and a perspective that they're coming from. And of course, the people who are hiring the designers, they have goals and outcomes that they are wanting. But definitely both sides should have the objective of how could we merge those two things and collaborate to get something that's really amazing at the end of the
Mhm.
day.
I love that. You said it super well. That synergy between the designer, the strategist, the client, sometimes it's just you and the client, sometimes it's a team of people, but when everything is flowing and everyone's on the same page and the alignment is there, right? At the end of the day, it's all about you're all on the same page with the vision and the end goal of this project, of this brand identity, of this website, whatever it is, design in any capacity. It just has to have a goal that you're working towards and everyone is aligned with. And when you have that synergy, that's where the magic really happens.
Yes, absolutely. Love good synergy. And it's actually synergy is like one of my favorite words. So just because of what comes out of it, right? So, Jesse, I think we're going to wrap up this conversation about the
Okay.
different lessons that we've learned being designers, brand strategists, and business owners. As we do with every episode, we like to finish with a segment we call Talk Branding to Me. Jesse, today is your turn. Talk branding to me.
Something that has come through really clearly for me, just even through this conversation, and I think I've even shared this with you in the past, but the seed was planted a long time ago for me in college. And shout out for anyone listening. I am an Ohio University alum from the Scripps College of Communication and specifically the School of Visual Communication. So any former students or classmates or professors I had that could possibly be listening to this episode one day. I love and miss that place every day of my life. It was the best 4 years by far. And anyone who knows me knows that. I loved college and I loved that communication school. And that's where it all started for me. The lessons we're talking about today, I will say so much, was of course learned on the job. But what did I learn back then that is really applicable to now and this conversation right now is everything we've sort of touched on. I remember a professor telling me to not design for design's sake and to always have a reason for what I was designing, right? I took fine arts classes as well as part of my track, but it wasn't about just slapping paint on a canvas or sculpting something and you just did it because you liked it and it could have, right? It was open to interpretation and it could just be what it was. I had to learn that design is an art form. Graphic design, publication design, editorial design, website design. All design is an art form, but most importantly, it is a form of communication. And the communication has to come first. The reason for designing, what the design represents, who it's speaking to, the message that it's delivering, and the action that it calls someone to take at the end. That is what good design is rooted in and what it's really about. It's art, but it's also communication. And I think strong design is a really good marriage of the two. It is something that is visually pleasing and catches someone's attention and makes them stop and makes them really look at it and read through it and consume it and experience it. But within seconds, they should know what they're looking at, what they're reading, what the message is about. I just learned that really early on. And to be honest, I think about it all the time. That's never left me. And the message, and the meaning behind it is simply just keeping in mind, no matter what you're designing, there has to be a reason for what you're doing, why you're using the typography that you're using, the colors that you're using, why you're placing certain elements here, symbols, icons, shapes, lines, right? Like keeping in mind all the principles of design and why you're using them in the ways that you're using them so that you are creating an end product that communicates a message just very clearly and very effectively. Don't design for design's sake, meaning don't just slap something together because you think it works or it's pretty or it represents something, in your mind. You have to design with, looking at a design through the lens of what the consumer is experiencing and
Mhm.
not like what it's about and why and maybe why you're creating it, but showing it to other people, getting feedback. I remember designing projects in college and then showing my roommates who didn't have art or design backgrounds, who did totally different things, and asking them, okay, what do you see? What do you think this is? What do you think the message is here? What is this promoting, advertising, talking about? So just keeping in mind at the end of the day that there always has to be an intention and a purpose for why you're designing what you're designing and why you're placing elements on a page. And you are really visually telling a story in some way, in some capacity, that is easily consumable, easily readable, easily digestible, easy to interpret. That lesson has just always stuck with me, that line, just that thought. It's like permanently in my brain. I can't get it out. So I always
Mhm.
think of it really anytime I design something, over 15 years later. So that speaks to the good education that I also received in design school. And that was a good foundation to then take with me into the workforce where I learned, of course, so much more building on top of that, actually being in work environments and on job sites too. The principles of design don't change at the end of the day. Even what was relevant years and years ago, those guiding principles and elements that date way back, they are still relevant today. They are still important to keep in mind today when we are designing any kind of project for a client.
Mhm. I will say, as I was listening to you talk about that, in my head, I was also hearing the same thing about branding, right? Being intentional with what you're
Yep.
creating. And we talk about the branding is strategy and style, which is also design. Being very purposeful and intentional, creating something that is valuable, that's something that
Mhm.
connects, something that's easily understood. So I love that you talked about design, and I also love how much it plays into the subject of branding, which is the
Mhm.
whole point of this entire podcast. So
Yes.
thank you for sharing your thoughts on that, Jesse. Well, friends, we are done for today's episode. So thank you so much for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to Talk Branding to Me. If today's conversation sparked a new way of thinking about your brand, we'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a fellow business owner who's ready to think deeper about branding and have fun with it too.
For more branding insights, behind the scenes conversations, and resources to support your brand journey, connect with us at Embellished Brands and at Untethered Design on social media.
Don't forget, branding is more than just aesthetics, it's both strategy and style.
Until next time, remember, you're fully capable of building a brand you're proud of, and we're here cheering you on every step of the way.